Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Judge Destroys Woke Prosecutors Dismisses Fake Charges. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. This is a great story coming out of the Daily Wire. This is a judge that does not mess around. Judge says feds can't selectively prosecute right-wing rioters while ignoring Antifa. And this judge has been in controversy before. This is the same judge featured in this story from the Daily Mail. Los Angeles Chief District Court judge who called black administrative clerk street smart steps down from the role after staff became upset that it was racially insensitive. And here's how he strikes back. He just does justice. Coming from Daily Wire, judge says feds can't selectively prosecute right-wing rioters while ignoring Antifa. No individuals associated with the left who engaged in anti-far-right speech and violently suppressed the protected speech of Trump supporters were charged with a federal crime for their part in starting riots at political events. That is textbook viewpoint discrimination. A judge in California threw out charges against two far-right political agitators, saying the federal government engaged in selective prosecution by charging right-wing rioters, but not the left-wing agitators they fought against, and who did the exact same thing. Robert Rundo and Robert Boman attended a pro-Donald Trump free speech rally in Berkeley on April 15, 2017 as members of Rise Against Movement, also known as RAM, a far-right white nationalist group that engaged in violence against left-wing groups like Antifa. One of those groups was By Any Means Necessary, BAMN, so RAM versus BAMN, which would descend upon right-wing events to shut them down and start fights. Quote, Antifa and related far-left groups decided they needed to shut this down. They came prepared for violence, bringing weapons, including pepper spray, fireworks, knives, and homemade bombs. Judge Cormac J. Carney of the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California wrote on February 21st. And they used those weapons, as well as their bodies, against Trump supporters and law enforcement. But after prosecutors filed an emergency motion to appeal, the Ninth Circuit had one of the right-wingers arrested the next day, February 22nd. Robert Rundo, quote, is to remain in custody pending resolution of appellant's motion to stay release pending appeal. No lower court may order his release absent further order of this court, the appeals court wrote. Judge Carney objected to the fact that federal prosecutors charged only right-wing participants, even though left-wing agitators performed identical conduct or worse at the same event, which prosecutors' own evidence acknowledged. Quote, no individuals associated with the left who engaged in anti-far-right speech and violently suppressed the protected speech of Trump supporters were charged with a federal crime for their part in starting riots at political events. That is textbook viewpoint discrimination, he wrote. Most telling in this case is the government's silence as to why it never pursued a case against a single member of Antifa or related far-left groups with respect to their violent conduct at pro-Trump events. Defendants have established selective prosecution. There is no doubt that the government did not prosecute similarly situated individuals. Antifa and related far-left groups attended the same Trump rallies as defendants, with the expressly stated intent of shutting down, through violence if necessary, protected political speech. At the same Trump rallies that form the basis for the defendant's prosecution, members of Antifa and related far-left groups engaged in organized violence to stifle protected speech, he continued. Of the 20 people arrested at the April 2017 Berkeley rally, the government charged only defendants and other members of RAM under the Anti-Riot Act. The government charged no members of Antifa, BAMN, or other far-left groups under the Anti-Riot Act for their use of violence to shut down the rally, the judge wrote. To put it simply, RAM and Antifa, which both appear to use violence to silence protected speech, are identical in material respects. The only difference is their speech and beliefs, the judge wrote. By many accounts, members of Antifa and related far-left groups engaged in worse conduct and in fact instigated much of the violence that broke out at these otherwise constitutionally protected rallies to silence the protected speech of the supporters of President Trump. That is constitutionally impermissible. The government cannot prosecute RAM members such as defendants while ignoring the violence of members of Antifa and related far-left groups because RAM engaged in what the government and many believe is more offensive speech, he wrote. The judge's order included photographs of Antifa engaging in violence at the same protest for which the defendants were charged. That's pretty cool. He actually put photographs in his order that he wrote up with his decision. Evidence showed that left-wing protesters had descended upon the pro-Trump rally to start a fight and did so. One man punched a Trump supporter, threw him onto a park bench to continue the beating, and was in the process of striking him until law enforcement intervened. A young woman used pepper spray and hit Trump supporters, explaining that she felt like fighting a white B-word today. I don't curse on this channel. Police detained one Antifa member who had an improvised explosive device, the judge wrote, citing reports from local police. Rundo and Boman said that more than 10 Antifa agitators were pummeling a black man wearing a red hat, and they sought to protect him. In October 2018, Nick Hanna, the U.S. attorney for the Central District of California, boasted that, quote, 4 local members of white supremacy groups face federal charges in attacks at political rallies. The case was being handled by the Terrorism and Export Crime Section of the DOJ's National Security Division. The government charged the men under a rarely used law called the Anti-Riot Act. The judge said that the law has often been criticized as dubious and was created in the 1960s by partisans who had the intent of imprisoning communists and black agitators. The law makes it a federal offense when interstate commerce or communication, including telephones, is used to plan what later becomes a riot. In 2019, the court dismissed the charges, finding that the Anti-Riot Act violated the First Amendment. But in March 2021, the appeals court overturned the ruling. In August 2023, Rundo was extradited from Romania. On February 21st, Carney again dismissed the charges based on their second argument of selective prosecution. Rundo was released from jail, but prosecutors immediately filed an emergency appeal to the Ninth Circuit, asking for Rundo to be arrested and held without bail, and saying they thought he might flee through the southern border if he was not. On February 23rd, appeals judges wrote that, quote, defendant appellate Robert Rundo has been arrested, and that lower courts were prohibited from releasing him as the government's appeal proceeds. And this is the same judge involved in a controversy because he complimented someone. They thought the compliment was somehow racial, even though street smart is not racial. From the Los Angeles Times, all he saw to me was my skin color. Clerk faces backlash from judge's comment. This goes back to 2020. Same judge. After 2 weeks of national protests over the death of George Floyd, the top federal judge in Southern California sat for a webinar to discuss the reopening of courthouses. Kiri K. Gray, the top clerk and executive for the courts, missed the webinar, but afterwards several people told her that her name came up. They told her Chief Judge Cormac J. Carney had praised her as street smart, a term some viewed as racially insensitive. I've been referred to as street smart. Anyone can be referred to as street smart. It means that you're not just educated by books, that you have a sense of what's actually going on in the world in context. Street smart does not mean that you're a certain racial minority. Gray, the first black woman to serve in her post, was not offended, but accepted an apology from Carney and hoped to move on. Yet his criticism mounted over the comment by others. The judge called her to vent. Quote, I did not have to even mention your name during the webinar, Gray recalled Carney said in the phone call. And it was not like I was the police officer standing on your neck. Gray said she was stunned and appalled. I'm very sad that you feel this way, she later wrote to the judge in an email memorializing the call. The two have not spoken since. It was this pair of comments by the one-time UCLA wide receiver that set off a chain of events that roiled the courts, even reaching the Ninth Circuit of Appeals. Many hoped the firestorm would stay within the walls of the court family, where judges with lifetime appointments hold sway and expect deference. But by the end of June, Carney announced that he was stepping down from the chief judgeship in an email to several hundred court staff and fellow judges. In his email June 26th, he said he considered street smart to be a compliment and chalked up the private comment to her as born out of anger and frustration. It was directed at my critics, not Ms. Gray, and I said it with no ill will or disrespect towards people of color, Carney wrote in his resignation email. My statement was an insensitive and graphic overreaction to criticism that was leveled against me. Gray at first was reluctant to publicly express her account, but amid a national reckoning over racial justice, she said she felt a need to tell her story and correct the record. She said she was shocked that when the news of Carney's resignation went public, some people attacked her for overreacting to the street smart comment, while dismissing the judge's remark that followed. Every time I think about it, it gets me upset, she said in an interview. People will understand my story now. Well, I understand her story, and I understand how, of course, anyone could be offended, but you do have to put intent into the equation. There was a hysteria going on over George Floyd, But obviously this judge is doing great work. They should have let him continue in his position. The turmoil began June 9th during a lunchtime webinar with Carney that was organized by the LA chapter of the Federal Bar Association. It was 9 days into Carney's role as chief judge, a 4-year term. Appointed by George Bush in 2003 after years on the Orange County Superior Court bench, Carney had long been assigned to the federal courthouse in Santa Ana. He relocated about 2 years ago to downtown LA to prepare for the chief's post. Quote, "Fortunately for me, we have just a fabulous clerk of the court in Kira Gray. She's so street smart and really knows her job," Carney said during the webinar. Now, that comment about being street smart in that context is to say, look, just because there are rules and procedures for getting things done inside of a clerk's office, it doesn't mean that's how everything happens. Also, you need to be able to tell when people are being straight with you and when they're not being straight with you. Street smart is a big compliment to someone, because someone who just follows the rules and just only knows the rules doesn't see things in context. That's why I appreciate it as a compliment when people call me street smart. Gray never heard the remark, nor has she listened to a recording of the webinar. She said she soon received notes and calls from attorneys and colleagues. Carney, in his resignation note and emails to Gray, acknowledged that lawyers, judges, and court staff expressed their displeasure. After a state prosecutor reached out to Carney with her critique of street smart, the judge asked Gray if he should respond. "I advised him to let it go," Gray said, seeing criticism as a side effect of his new role. "I informed him that being a chief judge is not an easy job." She does sound street smart. On June 10th, the day after the webinar, Carney nevertheless replied to the prosecutor and copied Gray. In his reply, the judge said that Gray knows my heart, that the term in no way offended her, and she was touched that I thought so highly of her. "Quite frankly, I view Gray as my sister, even though she is of color and I am a white man," Carney wrote to the prosecutor. He added that his email could be shared widely. Carney continued to be bothered by the criticism, according to Gray. In a second call with her, Carney made the remark that she found so cutting that he did not even have to mention her, and that it was not like, "I was the police officer standing on your neck." Yes, the police officer standing on your neck can be a very offensive comment and was misplaced when he said it. It sounds like Carney was just shocked that he got all of this strange pushback. Because yes, people do say things of all kinds, and if someone's offended and says, "Hey, you offended me with this," and then you respond sincerely and say, "Look, I apologize. I never intended to offend or speak down about you," that really should be enough in every situation, especially because you have people working with different experiences, different backgrounds, different cultures. And if you do or say something that offends someone and you apologize for it, that really needs to be enough. We can't function in society by only allowing certain people to be offended and then take extreme action because of their offense. Interestingly, you see Judge Carney responding the same way with this case where he says, look, you're not going to be prosecuting protesters on the right when you're not prosecuting people on the left for doing exactly the same thing. Gray said his comment was a double punch. It made her mind race toward an image of her adult son lying in the street, crying out. Why would her adult son be lying in the street? She would replay the comment in her mind and wrestle with the implication. She believed that if she were a white clerk of courts, none of this would have come into play. All he saw to me was my skin color, Gray said. But that's not true at all. What he saw about you is the good work that you're able to do, the effectiveness, your ability to actually be street smart in solving problems. This is why it can be difficult to work with people from different cultures. And now people are making it harder than ever. They're making it impossible. When Gray was appointed to the clerk of courts position in 2015, after a unanimous vote by a panel of judges, Courthouse News noted her incredible rise. To this day, judges single her out with praise. I'll bet they don't call her street smart. In a June 15th email thread on temporary fencing outside the courthouse, Carney asked her, "Are you okay? You sounded a little distant on the phone." Gray replied by confronting him, repeating the quote that specified a police officer kneeling on her neck. Carney replied in an email that he felt misinterpreted and said his use of street smart was intended as a point of praise. He noted that he used it to describe his wife, his best friend, and his son. "The negative comments are upsetting to me because I only intended to recognize and compliment you publicly, which I did not have to do, but I wanted people to know you were special," Carney said. He lamented how some people now view him as racially insensitive and described his long-standing friendships and ties with men of color. Quote, "I can get past the criticism of others, but I cannot continue as chief if you think this has irreparably damaged our relationship," Carney wrote. "This court can afford to lose me as chief," he said. "It cannot afford to lose you." Over the following 11 days, a maelstrom gathered over the state of their professional bond, according to sources familiar with the matter. The two did not speak directly. On the last Friday in June, Carney sent an email to hundreds of fellow judges and court staff announcing he was relinquishing his post. He remains a federal judge. Quote, I have apologized to Ms. Gray, but I've concluded that a simple apology will not put this matter to rest, Carney wrote. There will be division in the court, unnecessary, negative, and hurtful publicity, and a diversion from the court's essential mission of administering justice if I were to continue serving as the chief district judge. The news caught Gray by surprise, as did his resignation letter. She felt the letter did not give the full context of what happened and disputed his contention in the letter that she had told him that others wanted him to step down. Still, she hoped to move on. When the Times asked her for a comment about the judge's abrupt departure, she declined. It was a decision she soon regretted, feeling few knew her private anguish. Quote, no comment meant this version of the truth is true, Gray said. She soon received messages of vitriol laced with doubt, and she felt like the public zeroed in on the street smart moniker but dismissed everything else. Quote, shame on you, said a stranger who messaged her on Facebook. Street smart is not a term used for blacks. It's a compliment. You turned it into something it isn't. Letters to the editor printed by the Times echoed with disbelief. O'Farney Hutchinson, the president of the Los Angeles Urban Policy Roundtable, called for Carney to reconsider stepping down, saying it was absurd to label street smart as offensive. Hutchinson told the Times he stood by his call, noting that the street smart comment ignited the controversy. But he acknowledged that perhaps the aftermath left no other choice but for the judge to leave his post. Quote, it's always going to be there. That doesn't make for a happy and smooth and efficient working relationship, Hutchinson said. But we have a new judge now, and I think he's going to be terrific, and we will move on, said Hatter, a veteran federal court judge. Quote, I'm a big Laker fan, and they believe in the next Laker up, he added. Our district believes in the next chief up. Judge Carney obviously focuses on fairness and equal treatment under the law. It's a rare thing, but it's a great thing to see a judge stand up and say, no, you're not going to selectively prosecute people supporting one point of view over another point of view, regardless of what the points of view are. You shouldn't be prosecuting people on the right that you're not prosecuting on the left. And of course, you shouldn't be prosecuting people on the left if you're not prosecuting people on the right. That's what America is all about. Equal treatment under the law. We're not interested in equity. We're interested in equality. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.